So our next and final talk is going to be from Nathan Freitas. The official title was Lessons from 5 Years of Building Free, Open Source, Secure Apps on Android.
All right, I guess I get to bring it home. And I'm going to tell some stories today. I think maybe just to wrap this up on part inspirational, part call to action, as someone who has been doing this for a while in various forms. But I'm going to start with a story I wrote recently. It's called The Parable of the Clever Servant, the Leaky Bucket, and the Fearful Master. A servant was given a bucket and told to draw water from the well down the hill. The bucket was old and full of holes, making the servant's work difficult, annoying, and even dangerous, since she had to take more trips through the woods at dusk to bring enough water to the house each day. The woods were full of wolves and vagabonds, you see. The servant's master would watch her from the house as she made trips to and from the well throughout the day. The servant, being smart and resourceful, decided to patch the holes in her leaky bucket with mud and sticks. The repaired bucket kept all of the water inside and made the servant safer, since she could easily finish her work with less trips in the daylight hours. The servant was pleased, but her master was not. He called out to her to come over and asked why she had repaired the bucket. She was confused, as she thought he would be pleased, but instead he said, "Without the leaks, I cannot see from afar what you are carrying is actually water, and not wine you are getting from your vagabond friends in the woods. The fact that you have fixed your bucket proves you are up to mischief." The servant built up her courage and replied, "Are you drunk each morning? Are you bathing in wine? Of course not. You only need to drink the fresh water at your table and see the clean water in your bath to know I am honestly performing my duties. I am no friend to the vagabond. I fear them. I only plug the leaks to make my job easier and safer so that I may live a long and happy life." The master considered her wise words and then threw her in the dungeon, since she was clearly too smart and skilled to be trusted. The master continued on this way until all of the servants were locked up. Eventually, there were no more clever, hardworking servants to remember to lock the doors or clean up, and thus the estate was burglarized, and the master was either killed or eaten by vagabonds or wolves, depending on who tells the story. The servants eventually picked the lock to the dungeon to free themselves and built a new, beautiful estate, complete with excellent locks and running water upon the ruins of the master's follies. The wolves, in fact, turned out just to be stray and hungry dogs, and the vagabonds were actually just lost children who are always welcome in the new estate. So, we talk a lot about either clever cartoon characters or Alice and Bob and various kind of threat models, but I think sometimes it's important to think bigger, and to think about the times we're living in, to think about the place in history that we all have. And I think this room is full of great characters in history. I mean, the people that are here who've been working on cryptography and security and thinking about the internet for generations, literally maybe longer than some of before some of you were born. We're starting to get into a place where this isn't just about your papers or your cool hack or your code, and it's about life and death and about war. And I wanted to tell a second story about my own kind of origin myth within this space, because while some of you might know me through working on apps like Orbot or ChatSecure, many of you don't, and we all come from different backgrounds. I am an American, for better, for worse, but I'm proud of my heritage and I'm proud of my country. I just don't always agree with the government. So it turns out that back in 2001, on a sunny September 4th, I was running a company called Thin Air Apps, and Thin Air Apps was a mobile enterprise software company. We worked on the Palm Pilot and the first BlackBerry device and Pocket PCs. I was an Apple Newton user. In 1996, I sold all of my PCs so I could buy an Apple Newton. And I even had a wireless modem. So I've been doing this mobile thing for a long time. Anyway, I was building an enterprise business as a young man, startup entrepreneur in New York City. And I'm pretty proud to say that on September 4th, 2001, we announced a partnership with Certicom to license elliptical curve cryptography for our enterprise product. This was a big deal. We were on the the Motorola 68K Dragon Ball processor in the Palm. We needed efficient encryption for business users. And, I was putting all of my life and energy into making sure that corporations, pharmaceuticals, Wall Street had all of the security and power that they needed to stay private. So Thinner Apps was my company, and that was a great day, September 4th, 2001. We were really excited. 1 week later, it was very different. So I was on Mercer Street that day, September 11th, 2001, in Soho, where our office was. And, I still get emotional. Because everything we're talking about here, the Patriot Act that Phil brought up, the Snowden era, goes back to that moment for me. And to see what's happened since then, what my country has done, and the way we've reacted is shameful. So, one of the things that happened that day was, you may not have realized, or you may have known about, is that the way Manhattan is organized is that all of the infrastructure was routed, the network infrastructure at the time, through Lower Manhattan, right, through the Trade Center facilities. So when the towers came down, things went dark. We went very dark, not only in the world, but technically, right? So, all of our internet was gone, the fiber was gone, telecommunications was gone. And, I was working on mobile infrastructure then, and I had, fortunately, a previous incarnation of something called Ricochet, which was a radio technology that I ran in my college, we built our own towers, we built our own infrastructure, and then we were also working on Mobitex, which was a radio-based thing that BlackBerry really made popular, being a high-latency, resilient kind of network over which you could do things like elliptical curve cryptography. So out of all the people in Manhattan that day, actually my team, my little group of geeks, stayed more connected than anybody. And it was an amazing moment where, in the midst of all the chaos, we knew where we all were because we had some of the most resilient connections available. And later there was a lot of talk about the BlackBerries kept working. Why is that? Anything that was sort of cellular network-based or TCP/IP-based, or IP-based failed. But these other networks worked, and it was that moment of like, wow, I'm still connected to another human being, changed my memories of that day because there was a lot of panic about the loved ones. So, moving forward, obviously, we came back as a business. We figured out, along with everyone, a way forward. In the midst of war, in the midst of all these things, I said, you know what? I got to get back to work. America's got to get back to work. And, we built, there's another long story about how we used Wi-Fi mesh technology to get our office back online via a laser uplink to Manhattan. It's awesome. I'm not going to tell that story today. But, I got back to the business of empowering corporations to be more secure. Because I was a young man and I wanted to make money. And that went on for a little while until sort of the business market dropped out, the venture capital market dropped out, and we saw everything kind of plummet. So in December of 2001, just a few months later, we were acquired by Palm. And so I worked at Palm for a while on secure messaging. And again, I was thinking about that I was helping a lot of people, and I felt proud of myself that we were now building a secure messaging system, secure as much as it was at the time, but for every Palm device. And I did that for a few years, up until 2004 when I kind of got fed up. I got fed up with the corporate world. I got fed up with their unwillingness to start looking at open source. And I had this realization that everything I had built was patented and owned now by Palm. And 5 years of my life were about to go dark because I couldn't do anything with it. And so in 2004, I decided to change my life and leave that world. A lot of it was inspired by, people like Phil, learning about what was going on with cypherpunks and that movement and saying, I want to be part of that somehow. So thank you, all of you who were in that movement, who were planting some seeds for, a guy in his, how old was I then? Almost 30. And so on the eve of my 30th birthday, I decided to focus on not empowering corporations, financial companies, pharmaceuticals, law firms, and trying to empower everyone. Now, as part of this, I had been working on the side with a group of young Tibetans I had met in New York City. And if you don't know, Tibet is an occupied country for the last 50 years by the Chinese government. And in 2004, Tibetans were already starting to experience the kind of things that we talk about today as common. Targeted malware, right? Sort of mass, obviously, filtering and surveillance inside, but targeted malware attacks outside. And, Tibetans, in a sense, are kind of ground zero or testing ground for Chinese cyber war. Cyber in big quotes. And they were the kind of attacks and surveillance they were facing through things like GhostNet have honestly built careers in academia because it was such a rich and fertile ground of understanding what China has been doing. So for me, the post-Snowden kind of Snowden revelations were only a revelation in who was doing it and to whom. The kind of things in there are commonplace to me all the way back to 2005, 2006. So one of the things that I've done, though, is... I'm sorry about this for... Uh-oh. Oh, boy. So what I began in that year is a collaboration with Students for Free Tibet and a group that's called the Tibet Action Institute now, and which I'm the director of technology. So the step I took was that I wanted to bring cryptography and security and awareness to people that really needed it the most. And I didn't want to kind of go back to school and just do the research, but I wanted to get my hands really as dirty as possible and be in the field and be on the ground and be working with people as close to the human flesh, the metal of humans as possible. And so this began the work we do here. And one of our most popular things is some of our digital security training. And some of this is pretty fun. This is a video series we did teaching HTTPS to Tibetans. And they actually understood it well enough that they produced a series of pretty funny videos where this guy is trying to write a postcard and, he doesn't understand the difference between a postcard and an envelope and that whole thing. But the important thing here is that through the process of working with this community, they're now teaching each other about these tools, right? And they're now understanding fundamentally what a man-in-the-middle attack looks like. And we've set up processes and links to academia and links to Google and people like that to say, when there is an attack, let's connect in and kind of decouple that and understand who's doing it, what's happening, and analyze it. So this is... He's talking to God, by the way, and God's calling him an idiot. A shithead, really, is what he's calling him. But, yeah. So, so this led to, in fact, when you heard about Google responding to cyber attacks from China, the evidence they had came from the laptop of a Tibetan student at Stanford, right? And so this collaboration, this work that I began led to that moment and led to the ability to kind of empower a set of people to do what Jake's talking about, to know when they're being attacked, to gather the evidence, and to put it into action politically, and that empowers them to fight back, right? And admittedly, it's a lot easier to do this with Tibetans and China than to do it to your own country, right? And that's the new kind of front. But we've achieved this, right? In a sense. All right, so Tibet Action was great. this was all leading up to 2008 in Beijing, which was the Olympics. And one of the things that I was tasked with in 2008 for Beijing was to provide a secure communication system for over 70 activists who were going to try to get into Beijing to protest during the Olympics. And, China was pulling out all stops in order to keep this thing safe and secure and locked down. At that time, I was fortunate to get my hands on a couple crypto phones, which was great. These were the old school pre-smartphone ones, including the one that comes in a big suitcase, which was awesome. And Chris Seguin would love it. It was the ultimate spy gadget that I had to sneak into Korea. And so we actually had people with a handful of these things, and they worked, amazingly enough, over the Chinese CDPD network calling into the South Korea where I was, and very complicated. I'm sure we broke a lot of laws, but they worked. And we achieved a lot of interesting things then, understanding kind of how to keep people communicated. We didn't have encryption on the phones, but we did use Pigeon and Tor and things like that on netbooks. And, there was a lot I learned. But what I learned primarily in 2008 was how these tools existed for secure communications, but they were still very elitist in their cost and their difficulty to use. And so from there, I decided, again, to kind of I didn't want to just help 100 people, right? I wanted to understand how to help 10,000 or 100,000 people at this point. So this is kind of my next big point. So I'm trying to set this up a little bit in sections. First, it was great to kind of build my craft within a corporate environment, and that was great. But at one point, I decided I had to leave because I wanted to build tools for real people. And I did that for a while, and there was a scale which was useful and helped people in an important way, but helped a small amount of people, and that's fine. That was a good thing, but I got this itch that said I want to help more people at a scale that was greater. So at this point then, after 2008, I came up with the idea of the Guardian Project. And there's some very embarrassing slides out there now that I can't find right now. But I proposed the idea of building on the first version of Android, a secure smartphone, yada, yada, yada. But this was, in early 2009. And that's what the Guardian Project ultimately has been powered by, is that idea. And a lot of your other work, related to smartphones has come along to fulfill the sort of whole original vision that some of us had. I wanted to tell another short story and talk about important things that you can do as well that are important to help someone like me to do what the vision I want to fulfill. So, very early on, Jake was working as kind of an agent of entropy or a catalyst within the Tor project. And, I had this idea of I want to port Tor to a phone. And people said, Tor can't run on a phone, which was just a totally invalid idea. Of course it could. It just needed the right kind of phone. And so thanks to some notes from Adam Langley and Jake coming to Brooklyn and sitting down with me and in my little workshop, and we just sat there and we did it, right? And we got Tor to run on a phone, and that was in 2009, and that's great, and it was an exciting moment. But since then, I think I've released something like 100 different versions of what is now called Orbot. And so there's a moment of catalyst where those of you who have unique skills and knowledge can come in and make something new possible, which is great. But then there's that moment of, is this real? Is this going to actually reach people? Or is it just kind of a cool trick we did once? And I think there's a lot of work in this community that might be, not suffer from that, but where maybe you just take it only so far as a paper, right? Or as Kenny said yesterday, you go past sort of just the math part and you start looking at the network. But then there's that next step of, is this a real tool for real people? Are you going to see this thing all the way through to the end? And so, with what's now called Orbot, we've done that. And so Orbot is Tor on Android. And at this point, we have had over 5 million downloads on Google Play, and we have something like 2 million active installs around the world. And 2 million, millions used to be a big number. I know now we're talking about hundreds of millions and billions. But this is something that I've been doing for 5 years now, day in, day out. And sometimes you talk about what it takes, and being a tech support help desk and fixing bugs and dealing with another OpenSSL vulnerability is what it takes to get to millions of users. But I want to go back to that moment and say, think about yourself, who you are and what you can do. You can be like me and kind of take on a passion and a vision and try to deliver something. You can be like Dan or Tanya or Phil or Ian or, and build critical pieces, critical components of research that you put out there that, or Nick or Roger, obviously with Tor. You can do that and put it out in an open way and help others adopt it. You can be like Jake, and show up and make someone do something and make it work and make it happen, and then continue providing moral support along the way, but, then letting someone else do that. I mean, there's so many roles to play to actually change the world, right? To actually impact. But I want everyone to think about themselves in that thing. Think about yourself in this grand vision of change and where you fit and what you want to do, and think about what are you willing to do, right? So for myself, I've gave up what could have been a much more lucrative lifestyle, but I'm much happier. I've given up the ability to travel to China because I can't get a visa anymore, right? I've given up the ability to work for any company that does anything related to China, but I'm much happier, and and it's great, it's wonderful, but I had to make some hard decisions, and it's when I have trouble paying the bills, which I do, right? I mean, we all do. I have kids now, and that's another interesting thing is I've been doing this for 10 years, and when the Guardian Project started, none of us had kids, and now I think we have like 9 kids among us. And when you start getting to my age, I'm turning 40 on Sunday, by the way, so it's been 10 years, you have a lot to worry about. And I use my real name, and I have a lot to fear, but I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to be joyful, and I'm going to continue to embrace this work, and I'm really excited about the future. So I'm going to wrap up here with a couple really cool things on the research front that I want you to know about. So 2 projects which are very technical at this point. So on our blog, we have the first report from the Reproducible Builds Summit. No, it's not. Why isn't it here? So I'll talk about it separately. We've been working on reproducibility for a long time, deterministic builds. And we have a SDK that is, damn it, I don't know why it's not on there. You can find it, but we have an SDK for mobile development called CipherKit. It includes things like SQL Cipher for encrypted databases on mobile, IOCipher encrypted virtual file systems, NetCipher for locking down TLS settings, for doing Tor, things like this. And that is pretty much all sort of reproducibly built now. We're also working with F-Droid from the Free Software, supported by Free Software Foundation, for not only distributed app stores, but deterministically built apps so that you can have multiple notaries saying this APK matches, all of that, to break us out of that. So we have a big new project, proudly funded by U.S. taxpayer money from the Open Technology Fund. Happy to say that we are funded by them. And it's really important, critical work. And the movement right now on reproducibility is key. Developers and our build systems and our distribution systems are another threat attack, as we've seen many times now. If you can't break encryption, where do you go? Well, you can do the target attacks on end users, but also the target attacks on developers. So we're really focused on that over the next few years, and I'm really proud of the work Hans Christoph Steiner is doing, leading reproducibility on our work there. And another project then is called Camera V, which used to be called Informacam. And what I'm really proud about this is it's not a messaging app. And this is a bit of a call to arms, which is stop building messaging apps. Stop building web browser things. Think beyond what you need and think what, again, real people need. So we're working with a group in Brazil called Papo Reto. They document police violence in the favelas in Brazil. And their threat model is that if they film someone getting killed or shot or abused by the police will just go around to everyone's phone and see who might have taken pictures or photos or videos of that. So that's threat one. How do you capture media on a phone and hide it, right? And there's some cryptography related to that, and we've implemented some of that. But the second is, how do you authenticate media? And so there's so much noise and stuff coming in that people can't really trust what they see anymore. So Camera V has a beautiful, simple user interface in which you are generating a public-private key pair using Bouncy Castle PGP. It has Tor hidden services for sharing media securely between two people. It's got full encryption of everything directly from the camera sensor into storage. And it uses hashing and signing to notarize photos publicly and videos publicly so that you know they haven't been tampered with. So we've taken all the same kind of thinking we've been doing here, but we built a camera. And we did this with Witness, the human rights group founded by Peter Gabriel, and the app is out. We haven't really promoted it heavily yet, but it's, again, one of these places where, think beyond kind of what you need, think what other people need, find collaborators on that front, and build more than just another messaging app. So I love messaging apps, but and yeah, I think that's mostly what let me just check my notes really quick. I know I've covered a lot of things here. I guess I had a little joke, which I guess what I'm saying is, I asked Ian, when did you start working on OTR? 2000, he said 2000, 2001, right? And if you look at what Axolotl has done and the inspiration of OTR, and it really did come, I remember the first time when Moxie was working on TextSecure, and it was like, well, we're going to take OTR, and we're going to use ECC keys, and we're going to make it work over SMS, right? And so there is this connection, this lineage. And the idea now that Signal is declared a success usability-wise, anyone can use it, your dad, your uncle, your grandfather, your great-grandfather can all use it. That's great. But let's think about that it takes 15 years, right? And maybe that's our new measure of like, how far are you willing to go? How long can you do this? Can you stay in the game? Can you stand it? And I think all of you can. And my joke is that, sometimes you look and it's turtles all the way down, but that's okay because I love turtles. They're awesome. They're beautiful creatures and they're old. Turtles are like 100 years old, right? And they're still at it and they go swimming in the ocean every day. If you haven't been to Hawaii, go there and swim with turtles because then you'll love when it's turtles all the way down. Thank you very much.
All right, we have time for questions. Sorry.
So I'm wondering, can you come by to Eindhoven University and teach your security officer things about security? Yeah. Because we're having a hard time convincing him TLS is like the old version is bad.
Right.
It took us 6 months.
It might take 6 years, but I think this is, all of you should do this. I mean, it's nice to hear of lots of little kind of crypto party movements, but in the same way that Jake is talking about, sarcastically engaging with law enforcement, or actually, my nephew is a police officer in California, so I actually engage with him a lot. And I love him dearly, but we have to talk about these things. But I think, keep at it. I'm sure you'll make some progress. Once Facebook came out with, the Facebook.onion moment is a great moment, and Alec Muffet and Jake's work there and others work there deserve a lot of credit. But we'll have more Facebook onion moments, and then everyone will say, why not? And Chris Sagoyan's efforts getting Google to have HTTPS. I used to have to teach people how to turn HTTPS on with Gmail, and now I don't, and that makes me happy. So you'll get there. I'll come, but.
I was wondering, Dan Bernstein, USC and Eindhoven. I was wondering, what does your development model look like in terms of, where's your code and what kind of contributions do you take from other people? How do you allocate projects and decide which projects to work on, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Our biggest failure or weakness is that we kind of have a lab mentality. So we have a lot of different projects. And if you go to our code page or our apps page, you'll see some things that are more active than others. We're pretty typical. We used to be pretty physically centered in New York City, and since then it's gotten too expensive for all of us, and now we're fairly distributed. But we use the same. I mean, I've learned most of what I know from Tor about how to do these things. So I follow the Tor way. Everything's public, lists, specs, so it's all on our site. We have GitHub. We may be moving to GitLab. The collaboration with F-Droid, I think, is one that maybe a lot of you would be interested in, the reproducibility. So the F-Droid has a GitLab process. But in general, what we're looking for, I mean, a big one I'll make a call to arms are, I need more people working on Orbot. And Tor needs more people working on mobile. So there we have work on pluggable transports. We would love to get more pluggable transports built in there on mobile. So, and just more hands-on experience with an app that has millions of users. I'm, happy to have that. So I think mostly we like to take things that are, like, as one example, we worked with, David Fiffield on Meek. And so, at some point that became like production ready, and then we kind of took it and tested on mobile and ported it to Go and did, a few months of just verification that it was going to work. And now it ships in Orbot. So it's pretty quick time to market if you think something's ready. And then mostly we don't bother you with support help desk tickets. We take that on.
Okay, if there's no further questions, first of all, let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
And this brings us basically to the end. There's going to be a coffee break extending until they kick people out of the room, which should be something like you were saying, 6 o'clock. And one last thing, which is we should all thank the organizers. So Tanya got everything working and Anita outside also, so let's give them a big hand.